Welcome to my channel, where your adventure into the future starts right now. Step into a vibrant universe filled with groundbreaking technology, breathtaking alien landscapes, and exhilarating sci-fi narratives that challenge your imagination. From daring explorations of distant galaxies to haunting journeys through dystopian societies, we uncover the most captivating stories and innovative ideas that will shape the world of tomorrow. Subscribe today and join us on an incredible intergalactic voyage that promises to inspire and thrill. A Deathworlder slept peacefully in the heart of an alien war zone that terrified every other species. To the inhabitants of this war-torn galaxy, the concept of peace was foreign, something as distant and unattainable as the furthest stars. The planets in this sector had become nothing but fields of conflict. Every species involved in the dispute feared the zone, and for good reason. It was a region where nothing survived untouched. Wars, constant skirmishes, and the clashing of advanced technologies and merciless tactics had left the area in ruins. The air itself seemed heavy with the weight of past battles, the ground scarred by the countless attacks from alien forces. Death was a constant companion, and the very idea of peace was laughable to those who still had the strength to think or feel. But to the Deathworlder, the situation was far from alarming. He lay back in the dirt, his body resting against a battered stone structure that had once been a mighty fortress. The sounds of explosions and distant gunfire barely seemed to register as he closed his eyes. It was hard to tell if he even noticed the sharp, acrid smells that filled the air: smoke, blood, burnt metal, and ozone, all combining in an olfactory assault that could make anyone else gag. But the Deathworlder breathed it in deeply, not flinching or recoiling in the slightest. To him, this environment wasn't just tolerable, it was familiar. The Deathworlder's species had evolved under conditions far harsher than those that plagued this alien war zone. They had emerged from a world of savage landscapes, brutal ecosystems, and constant threats from both the natural world and each other. The survival instinct was built into them on a level so primal, so profound, that it had shaped every aspect of their biology and psyche. Unlike the alien races in the war zone, who had adapted to more stable environments, the Deathworlder was at home in chaos. Pain, danger, and death were not just things to endure, they were part of the fabric of his existence, woven into his being from the moment he was born. It was a fundamental difference that made him so dangerous and so utterly unshakable. Where others would hesitate, fear, or even break down in the face of overwhelming odds, the Deathworlder thrived. The violence of war wasn't something that rattled him, it was just another part of life. The explosions, the gunfire, the screams, these were the sounds of his environment. His species had faced far worse. The heat of battle was nothing compared to the heat of their home world, where the very air itself could turn hostile in a heartbeat. The Deathworlder had lived through storms of fire, droughts that would dry up oceans, and predators that could tear through steel as easily as flesh. To him, war zones were almost relaxing in comparison. Other species, from the delicate and intellectual to the brutish and monstrous, could only watch in awe or, more often, horror as the Deathworlder slumbered in the midst of a battlefield. He had no armor, no shield, no visible weapons, but there was something about him, something in his posture and presence that made even the most hardened soldiers hesitate. They would not dare approach, for fear that it might somehow provoke him. His stillness was deceptive. Behind it lay an unmatched lethality, honed over countless generations of survival in the harshest of conditions. When the Deathworlder woke, he did so slowly, with no sign of the rush or panic that the other soldiers displayed. His eyes opened, revealing a steady, unwavering focus. The sounds of the war zone didn't faze him, nor did the flashing lights or the smoke rising from the wreckage of a nearby building. He moved with a fluidity that belied the chaos around him, standing tall and unshaken as though he were a sentinel, surveying the war-torn landscape with calm precision. His movements were deliberate, each one calculated, his senses alive and sharp, taking in every detail. He had no need to fear, no need to rush. To him, the danger was merely a backdrop to his existence, something he had long since learned to navigate. The alien soldiers around him, the ones who had been so certain of their superiority, looked on in confusion and awe. To them, The war zone was a place to be feared, a place where survival was uncertain, and only the strongest, the quickest, the most cunning could make it out alive. And yet here was this singular figure, completely unperturbed by the violence that swirled around him. The Deathworlder seemed utterly indifferent to the weapons that whizzed by him or the bombs that rained down from above. He moved through it all with the same casual ease as someone strolling through a park. The technology used in this war zone was far beyond anything his species had ever encountered. Advanced alien weapons, capable of disintegrating entire buildings or creating holes in space itself, were fired at him without hesitation. But the Deathworlder, with his natural instincts and hardened reflexes, dodged, avoided, and countered them with a precision that left even the most elite forces in disbelief. His body, built for survival in a deadly environment, could take more punishment than any other species. A blow that would leave an alien soldier incapacitated or dead barely caused him to flinch. His skin was tough, his bones reinforced by years of living in an unforgiving world. And when his turn came, he struck with the fury and precision of a predator that had learned how to thrive in an environment where the only law was that of survival. The enemies of the Deathworlder, seeing him as an unstoppable force, began to withdraw. Despite the overwhelming odds, despite the deadly weapons at their disposal, they couldn't fathom how this lone being could be so unaffected by the dangers around him. And yet, for the Deathworlder, it was as simple as existing in his natural habitat. He didn't see the war zone as something to fear or conquer. It was just another challenge, another environment to adapt to and overcome. The battle raged around him, but he was at peace in it, his calmness only adding to the terror of those who faced him. As the war continued, the Deathworlder became a myth, a legend whispered among the ranks of every species. Stories circulated of the lone warrior who slept amidst the destruction, who moved through fire and death as though it were nothing more than a walk through a familiar landscape. His reputation spread across the galaxy, and more forces attempted to challenge him, to test the limits of his endurance and skill. But each time, they were met with failure. The Deathworlder's presence, his unshakable confidence, and his mastery of the environment became an almost supernatural force, one that defied all attempts to be defeated. Other species, in their fear and desperation, attempted to study the Deathworlder, to understand what made him so different, so invincible. Scientists and military strategists tried to uncover the secrets behind his strength, but they were met with frustration. What they found only deepened the mystery. The Deathworlder's species had evolved to survive the most extreme conditions, but there was something intangible. His very being resonated with the essence of survival itself. He had become something greater than just a soldier. He was the embodiment of life in a universe that seemed intent on snuffing it out. He had no fear, no hesitation. He simply was. There were no grand speeches, no displays of power. Just the quiet, implacable presence of a being who had seen all that the universe could throw at him and had not only survived, but thrived. While other warriors fought for honor or glory, the Deathworlder fought because that was what life demanded of him. It wasn't about winning or losing, it was about enduring, about continuing despite all odds. And that made him an impossible opponent. One that no alien race could quite understand. In the end, the Deathworlder became a symbol, not just of strength, but of endurance, of the unyielding will to survive. He stood in defiance of the chaos, a living testament to the power of his species and the resilience of life itself. Where others saw only destruction, he saw an opportunity to thrive. Where others would have been broken, he remained unbowed. And as the war continued to rage around him, the Deathworlder slept peacefully, a calm in the storm that would never be shaken. Even as the galaxy itself seemed to tear itself apart, the Deathworlder stood as a reminder that there were forces greater than war itself, and one of them was the will to live, no matter what. As years passed, and the war zone slowly shifted into a different phase of conflict, the Deathworlder remained, an ever-present figure amidst the turmoil. He had become part of the landscape, an unchanging presence in a constantly shifting world. Other species would come and go, their alliances formed and dissolved, their technologies advancing and faltering. But the Deathworlder was constant, his species' way of life so ingrained in him that it was impossible to separate. He had become a living relic, a walking paradox to the rest of the galaxy. How could he thrive when others were driven to madness by the same conditions? The truth was simple, though. The Deathworlder knew his environment. He didn't just survive it, he had mastered it. The concept of fear, of loss, of defeat, held no weight for him. It was as though his very existence were a middle finger to the concept of death. Where others faltered, he stood tall. Where others crumbled, he flourished. There were no greater mysteries for him, no unsolvable questions. The only law that mattered was survival. And he was the embodiment of survival itself. The universe would continue its conflicts, its wars, its endless cycle of birth and destruction. But as long as the Deathworlder slept peacefully in his war zone, as long as his kind existed, there would always be something to remind the galaxy that the most powerful force was the one that simply refused to die.